In 1957, a cook named Mabel worked the griddle at a Woolworth's lunch counter in Memphis. She never measured anything, never wrote down a recipe, and served hundreds of plates every day between 11 and 2. When that counter closed in 1974, the whole block noticed. Nobody replaced Mabel. They replaced her with a drive-through window. Number 19 on this list is so beloved in Indiana that small towns still hold festivals in its honor. And number 14 on this list fed Union soldiers during the Civil War long before it ever reached a lunch counter stool. These meals were never meant to impress anyone. They were built to fill you up, cost almost nothing, and taste like somebody cared. So hit subscribe and pull up a chair, because here are 30 lost lunch counter meals that disappeared after fast food took over. Number 30. Fried bologna sandwich. A thick slice of bologna, scored with a knife so it wouldn't curl, pressed flat on a hot griddle until the edges turned brown and crispy. 2 slices of soft white bread, a slap of yellow mustard, maybe a slice of American cheese if you asked for it. The whole thing cost a dime in 1961. It was the cheapest hot meal on the board, and truck drivers, factory workers, and teenagers on their lunch break all lined up for it. The trick was the scoring. Without those cuts, the bologna would buckle and curl in the center, leaving you with a dome of warm meat and cold bread around the edges. Every lunch counter cook knew this. No fast food chain ever figured out how to replicate that sear. They never tried. Number 29. Cottage cheese and fruit plate. Every lunch counter had a version of this, and none of them looked the same. Some gave you half a canned peach sitting on a leaf of iceberg lettuce with a scoop of cottage cheese beside it. Others arranged pineapple rings, pear halves, and a cherry on top like a small edible centerpiece. It was the meal women ordered when they wanted something light, and it came on a cold plate in the middle of summer when nothing hot sounded good. Try ordering a cottage cheese plate at any fast food counter today. You will get a blank stare. Before I go further, for the folks who want more recipes like these gathered in one place, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. You can find it at my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not push it again in this video. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 28. Cream chipped beef on toast. Soldiers called it something unprintable during both World Wars, but the lunch counter version was a different animal entirely. Paper-thin slices of dried beef stirred into a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and whole milk, poured over 2 slices of toast. Some counters used biscuits instead. It was salty, rich, and filling. Factory towns in Pennsylvania and Ohio kept this on the board well into the 1970s because the men coming off the night shift needed something heavy and fast. When the last Woolworth's lunch counters closed in 1997, creamed chipped beef lost its final home. Nobody mourned it publicly, but if you grew up eating it, you remember exactly how it tasted. Number 27. Welsh Rarebit. Melted cheddar cheese mixed with a splash of beer, a pinch of dry mustard, and Worcestershire sauce, poured hot over thick toast. It came from England, but ended up on almost every drugstore lunch counter in America by the 1940s. The name confused people then, and it confuses people now. It has nothing to do with rabbits. Rarebit was rich enough to count as a full meal and fast enough to make during a 15-minute lunch break. You could sit at the Walgreens soda fountain in Chicago and eat one while your prescription was being filled. When cheese became something you unwrapped from plastic, Rarebit quietly lost its reason to exist. Number 26. Ham steak with red-eye gravy. A thick round of country ham seared in a cast-iron skillet until the fat rendered out, and then black coffee poured right into the hot pan. That was the gravy. Coffee and ham drippings, nothing else. It came with 2 eggs and a biscuit or a side of grits, depending on where you sat down. In the rural South, this was a breakfast counter meal that could carry you through a full day of work in the field. The coffee cut through the salt of the ham in a way no cream gravy ever could. Fast food breakfast menus replaced it with a ham biscuit wrapped in foil, and something essential got lost in that translation. The lunch counter was never just about food, it was a place. You sat elbow to elbow with strangers on round vinyl stools that spun, and somebody behind the counter knew whether you took your coffee black. The formica was always wiped clean. The glass pie case always had something in it. There was no menu board with backlit photographs of meals. There was a chalkboard or a printed card tucked behind the napkin holder, or the cook just told you what was good today. When McDonald's opened its first 100 locations in the late 1950s, nobody thought the lunch counter was in danger. By 1975, half of them were gone. By 1990, the ones that remained were relics. The food survived in memory. The place did not. Number 25. Liver and onions. No meal divided a lunch counter faster than this one. You either loved it or you moved 3 stools down to get away from the smell. Thin slices of calf's liver dusted in seasoned flour and fried in butter alongside a pile of yellow onions that went soft and sweet in the pan. A side of mashed potatoes soaked up the juice. By the 1960s, liver and onions was already falling off menus as younger customers flat out refused to touch organ meat. Today, it survives in a handful of old-school diners scattered across the country, but no fast food chain ever considered putting it on the board. The audience was aging out, and the smell was never going to sell at a drive-thru. Number 24. Salmon croquettes. A can of pink salmon drained and mixed with crushed saltine crackers, an egg, and diced onion, shaped into small patties and fried golden brown. Tartar sauce on the side. Lemon wedge if the counter was fancy. This was the fish meal of the inland lunch counter, hundreds of miles from any ocean, and it showed up on Fridays in Catholic towns across the Midwest without fail. The canned salmon made it affordable. The crackers made it stretch. When frozen fish sticks took over school cafeterias and fast food menus in the 1970s, the humble croquette lost its spot on the board. Nobody protested. It just slid off the chalkboard one Friday and never came back. Number 23. Chicken a la king on toast points. Diced chicken in a thick cream sauce with green peas, diced pimento, and sometimes a splash of sherry, served over triangles of toast cut corner to corner. This was the lunch counter's version of elegance. The Schrafft's chain in New York served it on real china. The Woolworths in Topeka served it on a divided plastic plate. The sauce was always pale yellow and impossibly rich. The dish had been a hotel dining room staple since the 1890s, but the lunch counter democratized it. For 75 cents, you got what the Waldorf charged $3 for. By the 1980s, it was gone from almost every menu, replaced by nothing in particular. It just stopped appearing. Number 22. Denver sandwich. A Denver omelet folded between 2 slices of white bread, as common at lunch counters west of the Mississippi as the hamburger itself. Diced ham, green bell pepper, and onion cooked into beaten eggs, pressed flat on the griddle, and served with a pickle spear on the side. In Colorado and Wyoming, every counter had one. Some added cheese, some served it on toast instead of plain bread. You could eat it with one hand while reading the morning paper, and that simplicity was the whole point. Fast food chains tried and failed to turn the breakfast sandwich into something this satisfying. They settled for the Egg McMuffin instead. Number 21. Hot brown sandwich. The Brown Hotel in Louisville, Kentucky invented this in 1926, and within a decade, it had migrated to lunch counters across the Upper South. Open-faced turkey on white toast, covered in a rich Mornay sauce made from Parmesan and cream, topped with crispy bacon and a broiled tomato slice. The whole thing went under a salamander broiler until the cheese bubbled brown on top. It was messy, heavy, and required a knife and fork. That last part is what killed it. Fast food needed meals you could eat in a car. The hot brown needed a real plate and someone willing to wash it afterward. A few Louisville restaurants still serve it. Everywhere else, it is a ghost. Number 20. Slinger. If you did not grow up in St. Louis, you have probably never heard of this one. A pile of hash browns topped with 2 eggs, a hamburger patty, a ladle of chili, and a fistful of shredded cheese. Some counters threw diced raw onions on top for good measure. The whole thing arrived on an oval plate and weighed close to 2 pounds. It was the late-night meal of factory workers, cab drivers, and anyone leaving a bar at 2 in the morning. The diners along South Grand Avenue served them around the clock. A slinger required a cook who didn't mind the mess and a customer who didn't count calories. Fast food never even attempted it. What fast food actually replaced was not a type of food. It was a way of being fed. At a lunch counter, someone stood 3 feet away from you and cooked your meal while you watched. You saw the butter go into the pan. You heard the onions hit the griddle. The cook adjusted your order without you having to ask. Extra pickle? She already knew. When the chains moved the kitchen behind a wall and the customer behind a steering wheel, they didn't just change the menu. They removed the relationship. The meals on this list didn't disappear because people stopped wanting them. They disappeared because the places that served them required a human being behind the counter who remembered your name. That person cost more than a microwave. Number 19. Pork tenderloin sandwich. In Indiana, this is not a sandwich. It is an institution. A boneless piece of pork loin pounded flat with a meat mallet until it spread out far wider than the bun, dredged in seasoned flour and deep-fried until the coating crackled when you bit through it. The finished cutlet hung over the edges of a plain white hamburger bun by 2 or 3 inches on every side. Pickles, onion, and mustard. That was the standard. No lettuce, no tomato, no special sauce. The town of Huntington has served them since the 1930s, and Nick's Kitchen on the Courthouse Square has been frying them on the same equipment for 3 generations. The Indiana pork tenderloin sandwich was the meal that proved a lunch counter could have a regional identity as strong as any restaurant. Every small town had a version, and regulars argued for decades about whose was best: Edinburgh or Mooresville, Huntington or Decatur. These were real debates among people who ate lunch at a counter 5 days a week and took the question seriously. When the interstates pulled traffic away from small-town main streets in the 1960s and 1970s, the lunch counters that served these went dark one by one. The sandwich survived in a few stubborn spots, but the culture of sitting at a counter in a town you actually lived in, eating the same tenderloin your father ordered before you, that part is mostly gone. The breading recipe was never written down in most of these places. It lived in the hands of whoever was working the fryer that morning, and when she retired or the counter closed, the recipe went with her. A handful of Indiana towns still hold pork tenderloin festivals every summer. The lines stretch around the block. The people standing in them remember exactly what they are there for. Number 18. Horseshoe sandwich. Springfield, Illinois gave the world this one, and Springfield is about the only place that still makes it. An open-faced sandwich on thick-cut Texas toast, piled with a hamburger patty or sliced ham, covered with a blanket of French fries, and then doused in a warm cheese sauce that soaked into everything underneath. It was invented at the Leland Hotel in 1928. The name came from the shape of the original ham cut, which looked like a horseshoe sitting on the plate. A half portion was called a pony shoe. Lunch counters across central Illinois served them for decades, but the horseshoe was too regional, too messy, and too strange-sounding for any chain to adopt. Number 17. Loose meat sandwich. In 1926, a butcher named Fred Angel opened a small lunch counter in Muscatine, Iowa, and started serving seasoned ground beef cooked loose and crumbly, spooned onto a soft hamburger bun. He called his shop Made Right, and the sandwich spread across the Midwest like a quiet grass fire. Loose meat was cheaper than forming patties, and the texture was something else entirely. The beef crumbled when you bit into it, and half of it fell onto the wax paper below. You ate the fallout with a spoon. By the 1970s, Made Right had more than 100 locations across Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota. Most are gone now. The loose meat sandwich lives on in a few stubborn franchises and in the kitchens of people old enough to remember what it tasted like. Number 16. Corned beef hash and eggs, straight from the can, scooped onto a hot griddle, pressed flat with a spatula, and left alone until the bottom turned dark brown and crispy. One flip. 2 fried eggs cracked on top, toast on the side. The canned hash had a specific texture that homemade versions never quite matched, dense and salty with small cubes of potato held together by rendered beef fat. It was a meal that tasted better at a counter than it ever did at home, because the commercial griddle ran hotter and the cook knew exactly when to flip it by the sound alone. Canned corned beef hash is still on grocery shelves today. The counters that knew how to cook it right are not. Number 15. Beef Manhattan. Open-faced roast beef on white bread, a scoop of mashed potatoes beside it, and the whole plate swimming in brown gravy. In the Midwest, this was the Thursday special at half the lunch counters in town. The beef was roasted in-house early that morning, sliced thin, and kept warm in its own juices all through the lunch rush. The gravy came from the drippings. Nothing about it was complicated, but every part of it required a cook who roasted real beef and made real gravy from scratch. A beef Manhattan took hours of preparation before it took minutes to plate. The chains needed meals that took only minutes from start to finish. So they sold you a roast beef sandwich with no gravy, no potatoes, and no plate. Number 14. Salisbury steak. A doctor named James Salisbury believed during the Civil War that ground beef patties could cure a wide range of illness. He prescribed them to Union soldiers 3 times a day, cooked well done, with plenty of hot water to wash them down. The medical theory turned out to be wrong, but the meal outlasted the medicine by more than a century. By the 1920s, Salisbury steak had found a permanent home on lunch counter menus across the country. The cook formed seasoned ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs and egg into an oval patty, seared it on both sides, and smothered it in a rich brown mushroom gravy. It came with mashed potatoes and a vegetable, usually green beans or canned corn. Salisbury steak split the difference between a hamburger and a real sit-down dinner. It sat on a plate with proper sides, eaten with a knife and fork, at a counter where someone refilled your coffee without being asked. When TV dinners arrived in the 1950s, Swanson put a frozen version in a foil tray, and that cheap imitation eventually replaced the real thing in most people's minds. Today, the words Salisbury steak make people think of a freezer aisle, not a lunch counter. But the original was nothing like what Swanson put in that tray. The original had a crust from a real griddle, a patty that was hand-formed and seasoned differently at every counter in America, and gravy made fresh that morning from the actual drippings in the pan. The cook timed it by the sound of the sizzle, not by a microwave timer. Dr. Salisbury got the science wrong, but he accidentally invented one of the most comforting meals this country ever produced. Number 13. Open-faced hot turkey sandwich. Thanksgiving on a weekday, any week of the year. 2 slices of white bread laid flat on a plate covered in sliced roast turkey, topped with turkey gravy, and served with a scoop of mashed potatoes and a spoonful of cranberry sauce on the side. Some counters added a square of cornbread dressing next to it. The turkey was roasted whole in the kitchen every morning, and the gravy came from the pan drippings. It was the meal that made a lunch counter feel like somebody's dining room table. Diners in New England and the Midwest kept this on the menu year-round, but roasting a whole turkey every single day requires space, time, and labor that no fast food model could ever justify. Most of the women who worked these counters never got their names in a newspaper. They showed up before dawn, tied on an apron, and started cooking for people they would never see outside that room. They knew which regulars were diabetic. They knew who had just buried a wife. They put an extra biscuit on the plate when someone looked like they needed it, and they never once charged for the coffee refill. The lunch counter waitress was the most underpaid and underappreciated worker in the American food industry. When the counters closed, she didn't get a retirement party or a gold watch. She got a layoff notice and a paper application for the Wendy's down the street. Number 12. Oyster stew. Whole milk, a knob of butter, salt, pepper, and fresh shucked oysters with their own liquor. Nothing else went into the pot. The milk was heated slowly, the oysters dropped in, and the whole thing simmered just long enough for the edges to curl. It came in a thick white bowl with a handful of oyster crackers on the side. In port cities from Baltimore to New Orleans, oyster stew was a winter lunch counter standard and a Christmas Eve tradition in Catholic homes up and down the coast. The recipe couldn't be simplified any further, and it couldn't be made ahead of time. That made it impossible for fast food to replicate. Number 11. Chili size. In Southern California, this was what you ordered when a bowl of chili wasn't enough. a hamburger patty sitting open-faced on a bun with a thick scoop of chili ladled right over the top, finished with diced onions and shredded cheese. Tommy's in Los Angeles made it famous, but lunch counters from San Diego to Bakersfield served their own versions for decades. The name confused outsiders. It had nothing to do with the size of the portion. It was filling, cheap, and spectacularly messy. You needed a plate, a fork, and a tall stack of napkins. A drive-through window could never handle that kind of meal. Number 10. Stuffed pepper. A green bell pepper hollowed out and filled with a mixture of ground beef, cooked rice, diced onion, and tomato sauce, then baked until the pepper went soft and the filling browned on top. Lunch counters served one per plate with a side of buttered bread. In the 1950s and 1960s, this was everyday food across the Rust Belt, where Hungarian and Polish immigrants had carried the recipe over from Eastern Europe a generation earlier. It used whatever ground meat was on hand and cost almost nothing to prepare. But a stuffed pepper needs 45 minutes in an oven. That baking time made it a lunch counter exclusive, the kind of meal that only worked when someone started cooking long before the doors opened. Number 9. Chicken fried steak with cream gravy. A tough cut of round steak pounded thin, dipped in seasoned flour, then egg wash, then flour again, and fried in a skillet with a quarter-inch of hot oil until both sides turned golden brown. The cream gravy came from the pan drippings thickened with flour and whole milk, with enough cracked black pepper to see the specks floating through it. In Texas and Oklahoma, this was the default lunch order. You didn't need to look at a menu. You sat down and it appeared in front of you. The gravy went over the steak, over the mashed potatoes, and sometimes over the biscuit too. A few independent diners still serve a version, but the real thing, cooked to order in cast iron by someone who learned the timing from their mother, is nearly extinct. Number 8. Patty melt. A thin hamburger patty pressed between two slices of griddled rye bread with caramelized onions and melted Swiss cheese. The rye bread was the key because it held up to the grease better than white bread and added a bitter edge that tied the sweet onions to the salty beef. Tiny Naylor's Drive-In in Hollywood served a well-known version in the 1950s, and almost every counter in America had one on the board by 1960. The patty melt was what happened when a grilled cheese met a hamburger, and neither one backed down. When fast food simplified the hamburger into a thin disc on a soft sesame bun, the patty melt lost its place. It needed rye bread, real cheese, and a patient griddle. Fast food had none of those things. Number 7. Chicken and dumplings. A whole bird simmered in water with celery and onion until the meat fell off the bone, then strips of rolled-out dough dropped into that thick, cloudy broth and cooked until they turned soft and pillowy. The dumplings absorbed the chicken flavor and thickened the broth into something closer to a stew than a soup. Southern lunch counters served this in wide bowls with nothing on the side because nothing else was needed. The whole recipe required a morning of work. You put the bird on at 6 and served it at 11. That timeline was built for a lunch counter, not a fast food kitchen. When the counters shut down, chicken and dumplings retreated to church basements and the kitchens of grandmothers who still owned a stock pot big enough to hold a whole chicken. Number 6. Hamburger steak with mushroom gravy. Not a hamburger and not a steak. A thick patty of seasoned ground beef pan-fried without a bun and covered in a brown gravy loaded with sliced mushrooms. Mashed potatoes and green beans on the side completed the plate. In the 1950s and 1960s, this was what working men ordered at the counter when they wanted something that felt like a proper sit-down supper. It came on a real plate and you cut it with a knife. The gravy was built right from the drippings in the same pan the patty cooked in. Every part of this meal depended on someone standing right there tending it. And that is exactly why it couldn't survive the shift to pre-assembled heat-and-serve fast food. Number 5. Bean soup with cornbread. Navy beans soaked overnight, then cooked low and slow with a ham hock, a whole onion, and salt. That was the entire recipe. The United States Senate dining room has served a version of bean soup every single day since 1903, but the lunch counter version came first and lasted longer in the everyday lives of ordinary people. A bowl of bean soup and a square of hot cornbread could hold a dock worker until dinner. The ham hock gave the broth its body and its soul. You didn't eat the hock itself. It just sat in the pot and did its work all morning long. When instant soup packets and canned varieties flooded grocery shelves, the slow-cooked original lost its place on the board and never got it back. Number 4. Meatloaf sandwich. The loaf was made fresh that morning, a dense block of ground beef and pork mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, minced onion, and a ketchup glaze baked on top until the edges pulled away from the pan. The sandwich version was a thick, cold, or griddled slice laid on soft white bread with yellow mustard, or a schmear of leftover glaze. It was the lunch counter's way of turning yesterday's best effort into today's fastest meal. Some cooks served it warm with a ladle of gravy over the top. Others served it cold and let the dense, salty texture do all the talking. The meatloaf sandwich required a kitchen that actually baked a meatloaf from scratch, and that sentence alone tells you why it vanished from American menus. Number 3. Hot roast beef sandwich. Open-faced, sliced thin, laid across white bread with brown gravy poured over the top, and a mound of mashed potatoes on the side. It sounds simple because it was, but behind that simplicity was a piece of beef that had been roasting since dawn, carved by hand and plated in under 90 seconds during the lunch rush. The gravy was real. You could taste the beef drippings in it, the flour that thickened it, the black pepper that finished it. This was the lunch counter's anchor meal in working-class towns from Pittsburgh to Detroit to Milwaukee. I have to say this plainly. The Arby's roast beef sandwich is not the same thing. It never was. Processed sliced beef has no pan drippings. It comes with no gravy, no real plate, and no cook who made it that morning. Number 2. Pot roast platter. A thick piece of chuck roast braised for hours with onions, carrots, and celery in a covered pan until the meat could be pulled apart with a fork. The pot roast platter was the closest thing to a home-cooked meal you could buy for money at a lunch counter. It came with mashed potatoes, a ladle of gravy from the braising liquid, and whatever vegetable the cook had on hand that day. In the 1950s, lunch counters competed on their pot roast the way gas stations competed on price. A good one brought regulars back every single Thursday. A bad one sent them down the street for good. The recipe is not complicated. The labor is. A pot roast takes 3 hours of low heat and someone willing to check on it. Fast food eliminated the very idea of tending something for 3 hours. The pot roast platter didn't just leave the menu, it left the entire culture of eating out. Number 1. Blue Plate Special. It was never one dish. It was whatever the cook decided to make that day, served on a divided plate with 3 compartments, so the mashed potatoes didn't run into the green beans and the gravy stayed right where it belonged. The plates were originally blue, which is how the name stuck. The Blue Plate Special was the lunch counter's daily promise to you. You walked in, sat down, and whatever was on that plate was your meal. You didn't choose it. You trusted it. It cost 40 cents in 1953, and it came with a cup of coffee. The Blue Plate Special was not just food. It was an agreement between a cook and a customer, built on the quiet understanding that someone who feeds you every day will not let you down. When fast food replaced the lunch counter, it didn't just take the meals away. It took the trust. It took the plate. It took the person behind the counter who decided what was good today and set it down in front of you before you even had to ask. SpaghettiOs in a thermos were never hot. That was the unspoken truth everyone knew, but no one dared admit. They started hot, sure, bubbling on the stove in that cheerful red can. But by lunchtime, they were lukewarm at best, trapped in a metal container that always smelled slightly like old soup. And yet, those lukewarm pasta rings were magic. A swirling alphabet of childhood comfort, swirling in that iconic orange-red sauce. It was not Italian food, it was not even pasta, really. It was SpaghettiOs, and that was enough. Kids would open their thermos with a dramatic twist, steam barely rising, and proudly take a spoonful like it was gourmet. Because it was not just about taste, it was about ritual, about having something warm in a sea of cold sandwiches, about having a lunch that made you feel like home followed you to school. You knew you would burn your tongue on the first bite and still go in anyway. It was worth it. even when the sauce stained your shirt or your spoon got lost at the bottom of the thermos. You would do it again and again. Number 12. The patty melt on rye. A thin oval patty of ground chuck pressed flat on the griddle, salt and pepper only, no fancy spice. A heavy tangle of yellow onions cooked down slow in butter on the cool side of the grill until they turned the color of caramel and went soft and sweet. 2 slices of caraway rye, buttered on the outside, with a slice of Swiss cheese laid against one and a slice of American laid against the other. The patty went in the middle, the onions piled on top, the bread pressed flat under a steel weight, and the whole sandwich came off the grill the color of a chestnut. The patty melt came down from Los Angeles in the late 40s out of a small chain of coffee shops run by a restaurateur named Tiny Naylor, and it traveled east through the Dupar's locations and the Norms and Sambo's lookalikes that followed. By the early 80s, most chain coffee shops had quietly replaced the patty melt with a regular cheeseburger on a sesame bun, because the rye bread had a shorter shelf life and the caramelized onions held up the line. Number 21. The Sloppy Joe Sandwich. The recipe ran in the 1988 USDA quantity cookbook on a single page. 25 pounds of ground beef, 4 cans of tomato sauce, brown sugar, vinegar, mustard, onion, and Worcestershire. The mixture simmered in a tilt skillet for 40 minutes, then went into a hotel pan with a pair of long-handled scoops. A kindergartner got 1 scoop on a hamburger bun. A 6th grader got 2. The bun soaked through by the time your tray reached the table, and the only way to eat it was with a fork. Many older Americans still call it a manwich, like the Hunt's brand on the home shelf. The sodium count on a single Sloppy Joe ran past 900 milligrams, which the 2012 standards capped well below. Beefaroni in a thermos was the spaghetti sauce equivalent of a childhood survival kit. It was warm, sometimes tangy, soft, and always recognizable by that strange metal and tomato scent that lingered even after the last bite. Chef Boyardee was the man behind the madness, a culinary icon in a white mustache who turned canned pasta into childhood currency. If you had a thermos full of beefaroni, you were living large. No sandwiches, no mystery meats, just straight-up noodles and meat sauce from a can sealed inside a container that always burned your fingers. But here is the thing, it was delicious. Not gourmet delicious, but comfort food from a post-war grocery shelf delicious. The meat was more of a suggestion, the pasta was mushy, and the sauce stuck to your spoon like syrup. And yet, you wanted more, because it was yours. A warm, weird, familiar little meal that tasted like cartoons and Saturday mornings and the last week before summer break. These days, nobody brings canned pasta to school. But back then, that was luxury. That was lunch. Number 21. Welsh rarebit on toast. This was the elegant little luncheon plate that ladies ordered at the counter when they wanted something hot but not heavy. Something with a knife and fork and a cloth napkin instead of a paper one. Sharp cheddar grated by hand and melted slowly over low heat with half a bottle of ale, a spoon of Worcestershire sauce, a knife point of dry English mustard, and a single beaten egg yolk stirred in at the very last second to thicken the sauce. Poured thick over 2 triangles of buttered toast on a warm plate, sometimes with a slice of beefsteak tomato tucked underneath or a strip of crisp bacon laid across the top. Schrafft's served it through the late 60s. Horn and Hardart kept it on the automat menu until 1974. The dish disappeared because the word rarebit confused a generation of younger customers who looked at the menu board and thought the plate involved actual rabbit. Lunch counter managers stopped ordering the ingredients when the daily orders dropped below 10 plates, and the name itself never came back into circulation. Number 17. Spaghetti with meat sauce. The pasta came in 20-pound bags of dry strands, boiled in a 30-gallon kettle until a piece thrown at the wall stuck for 1 second and slid off. Kids who walked past the kitchen at 10 in the morning could smell the simmering tomato and oregano halfway down your hallway. The sauce was ground beef, canned tomato puree, garlic powder, oregano, and a pinch of sugar. A wire scoop fished portions of pasta out of the kettle, like a net pulling shells from surf, and a 6-ounce ladle dropped sauce on top. The serving line moved fast on spaghetti day. Kids with braces dreaded it and ate the garlic bread first. Sister Joan, in a Pittsburgh Catholic school, served the same plate every Tuesday for 19 years, with a sprinkle of dried parsley, because she said it made the sauce look fresher. The 2012 standards limited white pasta to 1 serving a week per child, and the recipe disappeared from most menus. Vienna sausages and saltines were not a meal. They were a dare. Tiny pink tubes floating in mystery juice, packed into a can that hissed when you opened it, like it knew it was about to be judged. You would drain them, maybe pat them dry, and line them up like little soldiers on a stack of saltines. No heat, no fuss, just raw, salty commitment. The crackers softened under the weight of the sausages, sometimes crumbling entirely. But you powered through because this was your lunch, and if you were lucky, there was mustard. Not fancy mustard. Yellow squeeze bottle stuff that cut through the meat-flavored monotony. It was not gourmet, it was survival. A lunch built for kids who knew how to eat without complaining. And maybe, just maybe, you started to like it. Maybe the weirdness became comforting, like knowing you could always count on something so unapologetically odd to be waiting in your lunchbox. Kids today would never touch them. But back then, they were a rite of passage. Number 17, liver and onions blue plate. This was the Tuesday special at McCrory's, the Thursday special at Newberry's, and a standing order at every counter that still believed in iron-rich meals for working men. A thick slab of calf's liver dredged in seasoned flour and pan-fried in bacon fat. A heavy tangle of yellow onions cooked down slow until they were brown and sweet and almost jam-like. The two laid side by side on a blue-rimmed plate with mashed potatoes and a small dish of stewed tomatoes. 65 cents in 1973 at a McCrory counter in Pennsylvania. Liver fell off lunch counter menus by 1977, not because anyone forgot how to cook it, but because the younger generation that came up after the war associated organ meat with the rationing years their parents had endured. The kids wanted hamburger. The counters that kept liver on the board watched the orders drop from 40 a day to 4. Number 23, Salisbury steak with brown gravy. The patty was beef and breadcrumb, shaped in a press and frozen flat, then baked from frozen for 40 minutes in a deep hotel pan. The gravy came from a sealed pouch of mushroom and onion base, mixed with hot water and stirred with a wooden paddle long enough to coat the back of a ladle. Cafeteria recipes from the 1988 USDA quantity cookbook called for 1 pound of meat to feed 5 kids, which made Salisbury steak the cheapest hot entree on the line. You either loved it or refused to eat it, and the lunch ladies could tell by 3rd grade which side of that line you were on. The patty went on mashed potatoes with green beans alongside, the gravy ladled across both. By the time the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act took effect in 2012, Salisbury steak carried more sodium than the new rules allowed. The wooden paddles went into storage. Kugel was not just peanut butter. It was an experiment in how far food companies could stretch the idea of flavored spread before people revolted. Banana Kugel, chocolate Kugel, even cinnamon. It came in a jar just like peanut butter, but the label had this psychedelic flair that practically screamed, "I was made in the 1970s." Your sandwich was suddenly a dessert, and not always in a good way. Some kids loved it, others could not stomach it. But if your mom packed you a Kugel sandwich, you knew one thing for sure. You were not eating anything normal today. It stuck to the roof of your mouth like drywall paste and smelled like a bakery that had lost its identity. Nobody knew what to pair it with, so people got creative. White bread was the usual suspect, maybe with some jelly if you were brave. It was part sugar rush, part lunch, and part science fair gone wrong. And then, just as quickly as it arrived, it vanished. Like a fever dream with a screw-on lid. Now, it is a ghost of school lunches past, one that gets weirder the more you try to remember it. Number 23, the egg salad sandwich on toasted white. 6 hard-boiled eggs chopped fine with a pastry cutter, mixed with Hellmann's, a spoon of yellow mustard, a pinch of celery seed, and a little chopped sweet pickle relish. Spread thick on 2 slices of toasted Wonder Bread, cut on the diagonal, served on a heavy diner plate with a pickle spear, a handful of rippled potato chips on a paper doily, and a small dish of cottage cheese with 1 orange wedge balanced on top. 29 cents at a Woolworth counter in 1971. The egg salad sandwich was the workhorse of every dime store lunch counter in the country, the one item the kitchen could make in volume and hold in the case all afternoon without losing quality. It disappeared because the lunch counter disappeared around it. Office workers stopped going downtown for lunch when the shopping malls drew the foot traffic out to the suburbs, and the regulars who ate 3 of these a week at the same chrome swivel stool every Tuesday simply stopped having a counter to walk to. Number 25. Tomato soup with a grilled cheese triangle. The soup came from a number 10 can of Campbell's condensed, thinned with whole milk in a steam kettle the size of a kitchen sink. The cheese was a half slice of American on white bread, grilled in butter on a flat top until your bread shattered when you bit into it. Lunch ladies cut every sandwich on the diagonal because the triangle dipped cleaner than the square. The ladle held 4 ounces, served into a 5-ounce bowl with a paper napkin folded under it. You dipped one corner, then another, and learned the order by 2nd grade. Today, the same lunch would fail 4 federal rules at once. Whole milk in the soup, white bread, butter on the griddle, and canned sodium together push past 740 milligrams. And whole grain bread now carries the sandwich. The original belongs to memory. Pickle and cheese roll-ups were the kid version of adult charcuterie. Except nobody knew what charcuterie was back then. It was just a dill pickle, wrapped in a slice of processed cheese, maybe stabbed with a toothpick if your mom was feeling fancy. Sometimes ham got involved, sometimes not. Either way, it was salty, slippery, and weirdly satisfying. This was the kind of lunch your mom packed when she was out of bread, but still wanted to say, "I tried." Velveeta was the cheese of choice because it bent, folded, and clung to the pickle like it had something to prove. You would pull it out at the lunch table and immediately get reactions. Some kids gagged, others begged for a bite. There was no middle ground. It was all crunch and chew and tang, a flavor bomb that somehow felt refreshing and heavy all at once. Keto kids today might think they invented the idea. They did not. We were rolling pickles in cheese before it was cool, and definitely before it was considered healthy. It may have looked like a lazy lunch hack, but back then, it was a declaration of resourcefulness. Number 22. Chicken croquettes with cream gravy. These were the leftover Chicken Monday special at every drugstore counter from Lancaster to Little Rock. Ground cooked chicken bound with thick white sauce, shaped into cones or pyramids, rolled in cracker crumbs, and deep fried until the outside crackled. Served 2 to a plate over mashed potatoes with a pool of pale cream gravy and a side of peas. The trick was the binder. The white sauce had to be cold and stiff enough to hold the shape through the fryer. Hinkle's in Lancaster County is still making them from a recipe that has not changed since the 60s. Nobody else is. Croquettes died because frying twice-cooked chicken takes more labor than the modern profit margin allows. 2 minutes of hand-shaping proportion does not survive contact with a chain franchise spreadsheet. Number 24. Fish sticks with tartar sauce. They came frozen in a wax-lined case of 200, breaded, golden, and rectangular, baked on a sheet pan for 15 minutes at 400 degrees. Friday was fish day in most American school districts because the Catholic kids needed the option, and once your kitchen was set up for them, the rule stayed for everyone. The tartar sauce was a paper cup of mayonnaise and pickle relish from the lunch lady's own bowl. 3 sticks per tray, a scoop of mac and cheese on the side, a square of cornbread. Kids who grew up watching Friday fish trays slide down the line still smell the lemon wedges when they pass a freezer aisle. The fish came from Atlantic pollock fillets caught off Massachusetts. By 2014, the breading carried too much sodium for elementary trays. The recipe simply walked off the menu. Jell-O salad with shredded carrots was a betrayal that somehow got passed off as a side dish for decades. It looked like dessert and tasted like confusion. Your fork would go in expecting sweetness and come out with carrot bits clinging to neon green gelatin. No one knows who started it. Some say it came from the church potluck crowd. Others swear it was a prank gone too far. Either way, it ended up on cafeteria trays and family tables alike. You could not escape it. Lime Jell-O was the most common offender, but there were worse versions: orange, lemon, and the truly cursed cherry with celery. Moms called it a salad, so you would eat it. But there was no lettuce, no dressing, just the jiggling horror of a dessert that desperately wanted to be a vegetable. It was served with pride, too. People molded it into rings, decorated it with pineapple slices, and acted like it was gourmet. You had to pretend to like it, not out of politeness, but because the grown-ups genuinely thought it was good. It was one of the strangest culinary gaslights of the 20th century. And somehow, it stuck. Number 24. The Cherry Coke Phosphate. This was the drink the soda jerk made by hand, one glass at a time, with a tall fluted glass and a long-handled spoon. A pump of cherry syrup at the bottom, a small splash of acid phosphate from a brown apothecary bottle, then cola pulled from a tap, and seltzer hissed in on top. The phosphate gave it a sharp, tangy bite that grocery store cola never had. Drugstore counters used real cherry bark syrup at the start of the 70s. By 1978, the phosphate bottle had quietly disappeared from most fountains because the FDA tightened the rules on food-grade phosphoric acid and the bottled supplier stopped shipping to small counters. Without the phosphate, a cherry Coke is just a soda with syrup. Nobody calls that a phosphate anymore. Number 15. Chicken patty on a bun. The patty was a perfectly round disc of pressed white meat, breaded and frozen, baked on a sheet pan in batches of 40 for 15 minutes. It went on a soft white bun with a leaf of iceberg lettuce and a single slice of pickle. No mayonnaise, no mustard, no condiment unless you asked. The patty was so round and uniform that you sometimes pulled it out of your bun and held it up like a coin. A kid in Tulsa or Tallahassee or Toledo could walk into any school cafeteria in 1987 and find the same chicken patty on the same bun, because all of them came from 3 commodity processors contracted by the USDA. The breading carried too much sodium under the 2012 standards. A whole grain bun replaced the white bun. The new version sits softer in the bun. American chop suey in a Tupperware bowl was the culinary equivalent of a shrug. Pasta, ground beef, tomato sauce, and whatever else your mom had lying around. It was not pretty, but it filled you up. The noodles were usually elbows, the meat was always overcooked, and the sauce was probably from a jar. Still, it had heart. It had the kind of comfort only a plastic lid could seal in. You would open it at lunch, and the steam would hit your face like a warm blanket that smelled like oregano. Some kids wrinkled their noses, others traded a fruit roll-up for a few bites. It was the kind of lunch that got better the longer it sat. Something about the way the noodles soaked up the sauce made it taste like home. And if it was cold, even better. You could fork it straight from the fridge and feel like a rebel. It was not Chinese, it was not Italian, it was just American. And it worked. Number 14. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Veterans called this dish a name we cannot put on this list, but the menu name was creamed chipped beef on toast. Dried, thin-sliced beef rinsed under cold water to pull the salt out, then folded into a thick white sauce made from butter and flour and milk. Ladled over 2 slices of toasted white bread on a flat oval plate, sometimes with a sprinkle of black pepper and a small dish of stewed prunes on the side. Horn and Hardart kept this in the automat coin slots through the early 70s. 40 cents a portion. The dish disappeared when the dried beef itself disappeared from the grocery shelf. Armour stopped making the small glass jars in commercial volume by 1981. Once the jar was gone, the home cooks could not make it either, and the lunch counters had no incoming generation of customers who had grown up eating it at the kitchen table. Number 22. Tater tots. They arrived in a 15-pound box from Oreita, frozen into perfect cylinders the size of a child's thumb. The cafeteria oven held 6 sheet pans at once, 400 degrees for 20 minutes. No flipping required. A scoop and a half went on each tray, salted from a steel shaker the lunch lady refilled every morning before the bell. Tater tots were the side that made every other side acceptable. You would push the corn around the compartment and eat the tots first, then dip the Salisbury steak in ketchup and eat it second, then drink the milk last. The pattern was as fixed as the bell schedule. Modern cafeteria fryers have been removed from most American elementary schools under the saturated fat rules, but the tots survive in some districts only as baked oven varieties, drier and lighter. The crispness is gone. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches were what happened when your parents wanted to show off a little. Elvis Presley supposedly ate them by the dozen, which gave them some sort of mythical cool factor. But even without the king's endorsement, they were the kind of lunch that made you feel like royalty. Greasy, sticky royalty. The peanut butter glued everything together, while the bacon gave it that crunch you could hear 2 tables over. Sweet, salty, and absolutely heart-stopping. Literally. This was not diet food. This was your mom was feeling generous food. Served on white bread, maybe toasted if she had time, it was the sandwich version of getting away with something. You were not supposed to eat bacon for lunch. You were definitely not supposed to drown it in peanut butter. And yet, there it was, crammed into a sandwich bag and sweating by noon. By the time lunch rolled around, the bacon was soggy, the peanut butter had oozed out the sides, and it was still somehow perfect. Nobody makes them anymore. Maybe that is for the best. But once upon a time, it was the king of brown bag lunches. Number 13, the 49-cent meatloaf plate. This was the dish promised earlier on this list, the blue plate special that cost 49 cents and came with 2 sides and a roll. 2 thick slices of meatloaf cut from a loaf that had been baked at 8 in the morning in a deep loaf pan, set on a plate with a ladle of brown gravy across the top. The 2 sides rotated by the day of the week, mashed potato and green beans on Monday, scalloped potato and stewed corn on Wednesday, buttered noodles and beets on Friday. A hard dinner roll with a foil-wrapped pad of margarine. The 49-cent meatloaf plate vanished because the math stopped working. Ground beef tripled in price between 1972 and 1979, while the counter could not raise the blue plate price without losing the regulars. The blue plate special as a concept survived in a handful of southern diners, but the 49-cent version of it died on the lunch counter floor. Number 19, rectangle cheese pizza. A frozen sheet of par-baked dough, 14 inches by 20, came stacked 12 to a case from a regional supplier. The kitchen ladled tomato sauce from a tilt skillet, spread it with the back of a serving spoon, then covered the whole sheet with 1.5 pounds of low-moisture mozzarella from a 5-pound bag. 8 minutes at 500 degrees, then the cook pulled the pan and cut it into 24 perfect rectangles with a long-handled wheel cutter. Each rectangle weighed about 4 ounces. In 1987, the line cost added up to 65 cents per serving, like a coin you could trade across the lunchroom. That was the cheapest hot entree the federal program allowed. The crust was thicker than a takeout pizza, almost focaccia, with a thin glaze of oil on the bottom from the parchment. The cheese cooled into a single rubbery layer that you could lift in one piece and eat folded over. Friday was rectangle pizza day in most American districts. Kids who hated the spinach side and pushed the orange wedge to one corner would still finish your rectangle pizza in 3 bites and ask whether seconds were left in the warming line. Lunch ladies learned to count the rectangles by the 3rd class through because the 8th grade boys came through last and would eat anything still warm. The recipe came from a 1988 USDA standardized cookbook distributed to school food service directors across all 50 states. Sister Mary Catherine, in a Cleveland parochial school, used the same recipe word for word, only doubled. The 2012 nutrition standards changed all of it. The dough now must be whole grain rich, the cheese must be reduced fat, the sodium per serving must come in under 480 milligrams. The original rectangle pizza carries closer to 700 milligrams in a single piece. What most people forget is that the cheese formula itself changed too, not just the crust. A modern version exists, made with cauliflower flour and reduced sodium cheese. But the texture and the smell are not the same. A child from 1986 would not recognize the slice on your tray. It came in a little metal tin with a key you had to crank open like a can of paint, and inside was a pinkish meat paste that somehow became the crown jewel of school lunches across the country. Deviled ham sandwiches on Wonder Bread were the kind of thing your mom would pack with the same confidence as someone handing you a gold bar. It was salty, it was tangy, and it had that uncanny ability to smell up the entire lunchroom in 5 seconds flat. There was no middle ground. You either prayed for a trade or guarded it like it was national treasure. And let us not forget the bread. Wonder Bread, so white and soft it almost melted when you touched it. It was less of a sandwich and more of an edible napkin wrapped around a meat mystery. Kids today could not even imagine something like this being edible, let alone desirable. But back then, it was what you looked forward to after recess. It was what reminded you that even if you forgot your homework, at least your lunch was unforgettable. Somehow, deviled ham became a status symbol for a very specific kind of childhood chaos. Number 16. Howard Johnson's fried clam strips. This was the dish the chain built its reputation on, and the dish that disappeared with the chain. The strips were the foot of the hard-shell sea clam, dipped in a thick, crinkly batter and fried to a deep golden brown. Served in a paper-lined basket with hand-cut fries and a small paper cup of tartar sauce, $8.50 for the tender sweet dinner in 1978. Jacques Pepin himself reworked the batter formula in the 60s. Howard Johnson's ran more than 1,000 restaurants at the peak. By the end of the 70s, the chain was bleeding locations. The clam supply tightened, the franchise model broke, and the orange roof started coming down one town at a time. Today, 2 Howard Johnson's locations remain, in Bangor and Lake Placid, and the fried clam strip is functionally extinct everywhere else. Number 20. Chicken pot pie. The crust was a sheet of pie dough laid flat across a deep hotel pan, and your filling was a thick stew of diced white meat, peas, carrots, and a roux made from chicken fat and flour. The whole pan baked for 45 minutes until the crust browned in patches. A square spatula cut servings the size of a paperback book. Steam came up off the gravy when your crust broke open. Cafeteria pot pie was one of the few items that crossed every American region with the same recipe, like a weather map drawn in pastry, because the USDA distributed surplus chicken to schools under the same commodity program from 1955 onward. The pies stopped appearing on most lines after 2012 because the crust carried too much saturated fat. Districts replaced them with chicken stew over a whole grain biscuit. Olive loaf on rye was your mom's attempt at sophistication, whether you asked for it or not. It looked like bologna, until you noticed the green pimento-stuffed olives embedded like some kind of edible mosaic. The meat was pink, the olives were green, and the whole sandwich smelled like a deli had gotten lost in a thrift store. Rye bread made it even fancier, with its dense texture and sharp tang. But kids did not care about fancy. They cared about not getting laughed at, and bringing olive loaf to school was social suicide. Still, it had its defenders. Kids who genuinely liked the odd mix of salty meat and briny olives. Maybe they were ahead of their time. Maybe they just had weird taste buds. Either way, they stood by it. You could find olive loaf in plastic lunchboxes next to Capri Suns and string cheese. It held its own in a world of peanut butter and jelly. It was bold, it was unapologetic, and most of all, it was forgotten. Today, even deli counters hesitate to carry it. But back then, it was a declaration. My mom shops at the nice grocery store. Number 25, the hot turkey sandwich. This was the plate you ordered when the weather turned mean and the bus was running late. 2 slices of soft white bread laid flat on a heavy oval platter. Slices of pulled turkey breast, never carved at the table, always carved in the back from a roast that had been sitting under foil since 10 in the morning. A spoon of bread stuffing on the side, a scoop of mashed potato with a thumbprint on top, and gravy ladled over the whole thing until the bread went soft and the fork barely needed sawing. Cost about $1.30 at a Woolworth counter in 1972. The hot turkey sandwich vanished because the steam table vanished. Drive-thrus cannot keep a turkey hot at the right humidity for 8 hours straight, and nobody wants to hand a customer a paper sack with gravy seeping through the bottom. Number 18. The corn dog on a stick. They came frozen, 80 to a case. The cornmeal batter already wrapped tight around a beef and pork frankfurter on a wooden skewer. The cafeteria oven baked them on parchment for 18 minutes. Then a kitchen worker tonged them onto trays 2 at a time. Mustard came in foil packets you tore open with your teeth. The wooden stick was the part most kids fought over after the dog was gone because you could prop it in a milk carton and pretend it was a flag. Corn Dog Day was usually a Wednesday on the 4-week rotation, paired with baked beans and a peach half. The cafeteria version was always oven-baked, like a leaner cousin to keep the saturated fat under the federal cap. By 2014, the breading tested above the new sodium limits. Most districts pulled it from your menu and never put it back. Hot dog pie was what happened when dinner and lunch collided in the middle of a very questionable casserole dish. It was part mystery, part meat, and all nostalgia. Imagine cutting into a pie crust expecting apples and finding chopped up hot dogs swimming in a sea of onion, ketchup, and maybe a few rogue vegetables. It should have been horrifying, but to kids in the 1970s, it was a warm hug from a world that did not know what cholesterol was. Moms made it when they had too many leftovers and no energy. Dads ate it like it was steak. And kids? Kids bragged about having it cold in their lunchboxes the next day. It was savory, sloppy, and full of heart. Not culinary heart, just the metaphorical kind. Every forkful was a gamble. Would you hit more meat or more mush? Did it matter? Probably not. All that mattered was that it felt homemade. It felt like someone tried. Even if that someone was making dinner out of the last 5 hot dogs, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and a dream. Today, it sounds like a fever dream. Back then, it was a Tuesday. Number 19. The hot roast beef plate. This was what every truck driver ordered before the night haul out of Cleveland. The dish promised at the top of this list, and it earned that promise 3 times over. 2 thick slices of roast beef carved from a top round that had been in the oven since 6 in the morning, laid over a single slice of white bread that soaked up the juice. A separate mound of mashed potatoes beside it with a well in the middle for more gravy. Brown gravy ladled hot over everything until the plate was almost swimming. A side of canned green beans cooked down with bacon fat, and a hard dinner roll wrapped in cellophane. The roast beef plate was the meal a working man ordered when he had 4 hours of driving ahead of him and 1 chance to eat before the next stop. The waitress in her paper crown brought it on the same heavy oval platter she used for the hot turkey, and the chrome swivel stools spun a quarter turn every time he reached for the salt. The plate disappeared in stages. First, the roasting ovens went out of the counters because the gas bills climbed faster than the lunch crowd grew. Then the carving station went out because slicing meat to order made no sense once frozen patties existed. Then the gravy went out because the kitchens with no carving station no longer had pan drippings, and powdered gravy mix made every plate taste the same. By 1979, the hot roast beef plate had moved from the lunch counter to the church basement and the Union Hall, where volunteer cooks still roasted a real piece of beef. Now it lives only in the muscle memory of a generation of drivers who could tell you which exit had a counter that still served it. Number 16. Chicken nuggets with dipping sauce. They came in 5-pound bags of frozen breaded white meat, 28 nuggets per pound, baked on parchment-lined sheet pans for 12 minutes at 450 degrees. Your dipping sauce was barbecue or honey mustard from a half-gallon jug, portioned into 1-ounce paper soufflé cups. 5 nuggets per tray for elementary, 7 for middle school. Chicken Nugget Day was the most predictable attendance day on the cafeteria calendar because almost no kid stayed home or brought a sack lunch that morning. The dinosaur-shaped version most adults remember today did not appear in school cafeterias until 1993. Through the 1980s, the nuggets were always the same uniform oval, slightly puffed at the seam, like a leaf folded once where the breading press closed. The 2012 sodium and saturated fat rules forced manufacturers to reformulate the breading. The crunch is softer and the salt is missing. Braunschweiger sandwiches were the dark horse of childhood lunches. Wrapped in wax paper and made with a spreadable meat that looked like wet clay, they were both feared and weirdly respected. Braunschweiger, for those who did not know, was liver sausage, soft, salty, and undeniably pungent. It spread like butter and smelled like your grandpa's hat closet. But it had a following, a small, loyal following. Kids who grew up in German households or with parents who loved real food swore by it. Served on rye bread, with mustard or onions if your parents were brave, it was the kind of lunch that made your classmates take a step back. You did not trade this sandwich. You defended it. You ate it with confidence. Or you tried to. The taste was overwhelming, but it stuck with you, literally and figuratively. No one could ever spell it, but everyone remembered it. It was the kind of lunch that made you grow up a little faster. And maybe, just maybe, miss it a little when it was gone. Number 20. The tuna melt on rye. 2 slices of dark rye laid open on the flat grill. Tuna salad spooned onto one half, a slice of American cheese laid on top, a slice of tomato sometimes, and the whole thing pressed flat under a heavy steel bacon weight while the bottom turned mahogany brown. The cheese ran down the sides and stuck to the grill in little crisp, lacy bits that the cook scraped up with a spatula and tucked back onto the plate. Drugstore counters loved this sandwich because it used up tuna salad that had been sitting in the case since breakfast. The tuna melt left lunch counters when the flat grill left lunch counters. A panini press cannot make the cheese skirts. A microwave makes the bread go limp. The melt only works on a seasoned griddle with a weight, and nobody has the space for that anymore. Creamed chipped beef on toast, also known as stuff on a shingle, was a meal built in the trenches that somehow ended up in American cafeterias. It started in the military, a way to stretch dried beef into something resembling sustenance. The beef was salty, thin, and usually shredded beyond recognition. The sauce? A thick white gravy made from flour, milk, and determination. It was poured generously over toast, biscuits, or anything else that could act as a sponge. In school lunches, it arrived in lukewarm plastic trays, never quite hot, never quite cold. Kids either loved it or dreaded it. There was no in-between. It was filling, fast, and had that unmistakable cafeteria smell that followed you into math class. Some parents made it at home, calling it comfort food. Others never touched it again after leaving the service. But for a generation of kids, it was just lunch. A strange, salty, beige experience that somehow stuck around long enough to be missed. Number 18. The Walgreens Banana Split. 3 scoops of ice cream lined up in a long boat-shaped glass dish, vanilla in the middle, chocolate on one end, strawberry on the other. A whole banana split lengthwise tucked against the scoops on both sides. 3 syrups poured one over each scoop, chocolate over vanilla, marshmallow over chocolate, pineapple or strawberry over the strawberry. A halo of whipped cream piped from a metal canister, 3 maraschino cherries set on top, and a handful of chopped peanuts scattered across the whole landscape. Walgreens kept this on the menu because the soda fountain was where the chain started in 1920. The banana split left the counter in 1985 when the last Walgreens fountain in Chicago closed for good. The cost of a soda jerk who could build a split in under 90 seconds had become higher than the price the chain was willing to charge for the dish. If any of these meals brought something back for you, pick one and make it this week. Try the liver and onions if you have the nerve. Try the meatloaf sandwich if you want something easy. Or try the chicken and dumplings if you have a whole Sunday to give it. Tell me in the comments which lunch counter meal you missed the most. I am James, and I will see you in the next one.